My name is Marc Lesser, and here to talk about accomplishing more by doing less. And I was just saying to Meryl, I'm not used to being in an environment where everyone has their laptop out and is trying to do more while we do less. But maybe the sounds of the espresso machine also will keep everyone really energized and focused as well. I wanted to start by reading a little poem, and this is a poem from a very old document called the Tao Te Ching, and it goes like this. The wise person acts without doing anything extra. Things arise, and she is appreciative. Things disappear, and she pays careful attention. She has great fulfillment, but possesses nothing. She acts without false expectations. When the work is done, she's joyful and content. That is why it lasts forever. I'm going to read that again. The wise person acts without doing anything extra. Things arise, and she is appreciative. Things disappear, and she pays careful attention. She has great fulfillment, but possesses nothing. She acts without false expectations. When the work is done, she's joyful and content. That is why it lasts forever. I thought that was a pretty good introduction to this topic, and particularly here at Google. I think Google has a way of having very high and not false expectations, and strives to do things in a way to have great accomplishments without there being a lot of extra work and extra activity. I thought I would just say just a few words about me and my background. As I mentioned, I'm Marc Lesser, and I grew up in New Jersey, and when I was at college at Rutgers University in the 70s, I took a one-year leave of absence and headed to California and proceeded to spend the following 10 years living at the San Francisco Zen Center. And my 10th year at the Zen Center, I was director of a place called Tassajara. How many of you have heard of Tassajara? And I hope it's a great place in the summertime if you haven't been there. Fabulous hot springs resort, food, a great place to do less. So a big part of this talk is looking at ways to do less. I discovered during my 10th year at the Zen Center, when I was director of Tassajara, much to my surprise, I discovered that though I thought I was this Zen monk and Zen practitioner, that I was also a business guy. I was running a resort and monastery that had about $1 million budget. There were all the problems and issues of managing people, of budgets, of projects. We were building some bridges and changing the hot baths. And so it not only did I discover that there didn't seem to be any real conflict between spiritual practice and business practice, it looked to me like they could be great partners. And that there is, and naturally, since I had just had 10 years of training in spiritual practice, it was clear that what I should do next was go to business school. And that's what I did. I went right from Tassajara to the East Coast and went to NYU Business School, came back out to the West Coast, and I started a publishing company called Brush Dance that makes calendars and greeting cards mostly with spiritual themes. One of our best-selling greeting cards said, if you think you're too small to be effective, you've never been in bed with a mosquito. It was one of our 15-year best-selling cards. We also licensed the words of like the Dalai Lama and Thich Nhat Hanh, poetry of Rumi. It was a really terrific company that I started and ran for 15 years. And then about 3 years ago, I got into the coaching and consulting business, and that's what I do these days. And I'm a coach here at Google. I've been coaching here for about a year. It's a program that Meryl Blanchard is mentoring, starting, just kind of seeing it along, growing this program here at Google. And it's been really wonderful experience for me to meet people here and work with people, particularly on issues of leadership and communication. And And I feel like a lot of what I'm doing often is around this topic of accomplishing more by doing less. I wanted to talk about just a few little stories, a few little images that come to mind about this topic. One is a story that I heard over the weekend, which was about sawmills, about making wood in sawmills. And someone was describing to me how, I guess it was about 50 or 60 years ago, that sawdust was this huge problem, that sawdust was just piling up as these trees were being milled, and the sawdust was being just put into landfills, and it was a big issue. Well, at some point, someone had this brilliant idea that sawdust could be used and made into plywood. And this was, I thought, a really wonderful way to accomplish something by doing less. And in fact, it's also a really good example in that it's taking garbage. It's taking something that looks like it's not needed and making it into something that is really, really useful. And I think this is a really good metaphor in our lives of, most of us don't want to look at the garbage in our lives. And it's that garbage in our lives, or that stuff that's extra, the stuff that we do that's automatic. For example, I was with a coaching client just a few days ago who said, my day tomorrow is horrendous. I really have this horrendous day tomorrow. It's going to be hectic and busy. I'm going to be going from one thing to another. And I immediately got into him a discussion about priming and what I've been calling the power of positive priming. Anybody familiar with this term, priming? It's become quite popular because Malcolm Gladwell in the book Blink talks a lot about priming. And priming is like if I were to yawn, or if I were to use the word yawn, many of you without even, like someone's yawning now. No, not really. But if words like yawn or tired, or words like hectic and busy and stretched. Now, in our culture, and I'm sure this doesn't happen here at Google, but in general, these words and being so busy that you can't get to everything is kind of a badge of honor, right? If you're not running from one thing to another, if you're not constantly on the go, then you're kind of a loser in our culture. And there's kind of this, imagine if someone said, "What are you doing today?" and you said, "Hanging out," like, or if you said, "I'm thinking about, I'm doing some creative work." I mean, one thing I would ask you to think about is like when and where did you have your last really creative and interesting idea? Like just think about that for a moment. What was your last really creative idea? And how about, I'm going to throw, what comes to mind? And where, what was the idea and where were you?
Well, I can't talk about the idea.
Yeah, I understand.
But, I was driving north on 101 at an unpleasantly early hour when I would rather be asleep.
Right. Yes. So driving. I think driving is where many great ideas from. Showering, I've noticed. Like, it's good to spend a lot of time in the shower. Great ideas seem to happen in the shower rather than rush through your shower, or even things like washing dishes is another place where great ideas often occur. Another image I wanted. Yes.
I was going to say, I actually had an idea while I was sitting here listening. Sometimes it's taking time away from your desk in the day-to-day, just having a pause.
You know, I find that the most creative time that I have is when I sit down on an airplane. When I get in on an airplane, the world is different, and suddenly I'm out of my usual environment, and I have a completely different perspective on things. And I usually start writing and start doing my planning and goal setting during that time. I wanted to talk about one other image that has been a really important image to me that I think is very relevant to this accomplishing more by doing less topic. And this is something that occurred while I was a Zen student living at Green Gulch Farm in Marin County. And my job there, which was quite surprising that I got asked to do this work, I was in charge of the draft horse farming project up at Green Gulch. And particularly surprising, I had been a student at Tassajara, and I had gotten tapped on the shoulder one day and asked if I would go be in charge of this draft horse farming project. And I thought for sure that someone must have misread my resume, because though I was pretty good at gymnastics and the horses in high school, I had never at all seen a four-legged horse. But one of the really important skills that was needed while being a horse farmer at Green Gulch was the skill of welding, was learning to weld and fix this old horse equipment that was lying around Green Gulch. And I was very lucky to have a terrific welding teacher who was actually a Yurok Indian trained shaman, as well as a PhD trained agronomist at UC Berkeley. And he told me one day that the secret of welding is to realize that the natural state of metal is liquid, that it just happens to be frozen, and that welding is applying heat to this metal and returning it to its natural state, which is liquid. And that once you do that, once you've softened this metal, you can shape it easily. You can accomplish a lot by doing very little with this softened metal. And as my teacher, his name was Harry Roberts, as he told me that, he would let out this loud belly laugh and say, this also is the secret of being a human being. That we and our lives and things appear solid, that we get into this state of seeing everything as kind of fixed and solid, and that the secret is to apply, in this case, it's the heat of our attention, putting our attention on things and seeing that the world is actually much, much more fluid than we think it is. And I think this is a really good image and starting point, that image of fluidity and the image of the sawmill and having this kind of creative way of turning garbage, turning what's not needed into things that are useful. And now I want to segue into this, what I think of as, I want to talk about seven different practices, 7 different things that I think are quite practical and ways that you can take this accomplishing more by doing less into your daily lives, and particularly into your work lives. The first is, I would call, retreat to get ahead. Retreat to get ahead. And I almost always, in my coaching practice, one of the first things I do with people that I'm working with is suggest strongly that they have some kind of a meditation practice in their lives. And it can just be 10 or 15 minutes in the morning or 10 or 15 minutes in the evening when you take some time to just appreciate being alive. And meditation is really no more complex than that. It's taking the time to stop where you're not doing anything and you're just being completely with your own breath and body. Being with your own breath and body and having a spirit of curiosity and appreciation. I mean, what a marvelous gift to be able to give to ourselves in a daily way, to take that time of to be able to spend some time with that spirit of curiosity and a spirit of appreciation. And in addition to a daily practice, I also highly recommend that you take some kind of retreat in your lives. And this is different than a vacation. You know, you hear over and over again that vacations are usually so much about doing. A retreat is to take some time where you're actually not doing. And there's some real wisdom to the to the Jewish Sabbath, the practice of taking, from Friday night. I mean, imagine having a day a week where you weren't doing anything, where and we did this. I did this in my family, particularly when my kids were young. We had just a few rules that made a huge difference. One rule was no spending money. Another rule was no getting in the car. Those two rules are, imagine having a day where you don't get in your car and you don't spend money. What would you do? What you would do is life gets a lot slower when you're not a consumer and when you're not traveling by car. So some kind of retreat, and whether it's, again, I know for most people once a week is probably not very realistic, but I think once a year. Even Bill Gates, I read, takes 2 weeks off as a retreat, where he literally does not go on vacation but goes on retreat. I heard a really interesting quote the other day and I heard this was something that Gandhi had said, that when Gandhi the more he became known and recognized as a public figure, he of course became busier and busier. And someone asked him, they said, how is it that you handle all of these demands on your life? What do you do? And his response was, well, I used to take 1 month off every year as a retreat, but now I've gotten so busy I have to take 2 months off. And I thought that was a really terrific answer. So that's practice number one, is retreat to get ahead. The second practice is what I'd call investigating reality. The practice of investigating reality. And by this, again, I simply mean that you take the time to look at basic things like, what is it you are really doing? What is it you're really doing? So like I find with coaching clients, it's really interesting to see that if I'm coaching someone who is a leader, say they're a leader in the engineering department, they might not get that their job, what they're really doing, should not be writing code. As much as they love writing code, that someone who is overseeing a team has a leadership position, and their main job may be inspiring people. Their main job may be mentoring, guiding, and listening, or their main job may be team building. So this is a really interesting question, I think, to be asking. I did a talk recently for some insurance agents, and I had just happened to have more contact with the insurance world than I wanted to, as I was looking into car insurance and liability insurance, and I got a whole new perspective on what insurance was. And there I was in a room with insurance agents, 50 insurance agents, and I asked them, what business did they really think they were in? And it was startling that most of them didn't really know what business they were in. And it looked to me like they were in the business of compassion, that they were in the business of really helping to reduce risk of people, and that just asking those most basic questions was really, really useful. Part of this investigating reality goes back to something I mentioned earlier about what I call priming and positive priming. So look and see what kind of priming do you do? How do you set up your days? How do you set your intention? What is your intention during the day? Is your intention to be busy and overwhelmed? Or is your intention what is your intention to get a lot done with ease? What about that? Who says that getting things done and accomplishing has to be really difficult and hectic? We've just heard that some of the best ideas in this room came from when you're in your car, or when you sit down in an airplane, or when you when you take an hour out of your day and sit down for a talk. This is where accomplishments often happen. So there's a lot more I could say about investigating reality. Maybe one other piece I would say is this is also where mindfulness practice happens, the practice of really paying attention to not just the things in your room and not just to other people, but paying attention to how you show up. Your own presence will have such tremendous effect on what you accomplish. So being aware of how it is you show up. How are you being present? Yeah. I was just lecturing someone this morning. Someone appeared at my house, pulled up in my driveway, jammed on the brakes, was on the cell phone, and it just felt like such a setup to be doing so many things at once. And so an assignment I gave this person was to please show up at my coaching meetings not on the telephone, on time, and driving at a normal pace. What would that be like? And this is part of priming yourself priming yourself for success, priming yourself for accomplishing more by doing less. So retreat to get ahead, investigate reality. The third is about routines, and it's what I call create routines that mint gold. Creating routines that mint gold. This expression comes from a poem by the 13th century Persian poet Rumi, where he says, "We all human beings have routines. Why not create routines that mint gold?" And I would say that, in a way, all of these 7 steps, these 7 practices that I'm going to speak about are, they're very much interrelated. So an example of a routine that mints gold, I would say, is a meditation practice, having a retreat, positive priming. But what about having positive priming as a routine, something that you do every day, maybe noticing that you may already have some other kind of priming routine in your life about, oh, isn't this going to be a horrible, busy day? Or I'm really, I'm really feeling, having a lot of second thoughts and fears about this day, and you're entering this day in some way where you're afraid, as opposed to, I'm really feeling a lot of courage. I'm gonna face into fears today, and I'm feeling a lot of courage in my day. So all kinds of routines, and it starts with paying attention to what routines you do have. Routines like what is it that you eat? What are your routines about food? What are your routines about exercise? What are your routines about communication? How do you speak to people? How do you start the day? Like when you arrive at Google, do you have a routine? I used to find it really useful that when I get to my office, when I start my day, I usually spend 5 or 10 minutes of just looking at what my plans are, just being aware of my own breath, just kind of feeling what it's just being consciously in my body is what I find a really useful routine to start the day. I often find that in meetings, having some kind of routines about connecting with people, often just having some way that you bring people into the room, into their bodies, into some kind of connection, again, it's a way to prime the meeting, is to maybe ask people about a creative idea, ask them something that they've done that has been some accomplishment that they had, something that they solved. So routines is the third in this accomplishing more by doing less practices. The fourth is what I call communication matters. Communication matters. And you've probably noticed this, that nothing happens just by yourself. That everything about our lives, inside and outside of work, involve other people. And of course, this is obvious, and there's so much that I could say about this, but I'll say maybe just two things. One is to be aware of your emotional wake, like to be aware of your own emotional presence. How, what messages are you giving? Are you someone who creates stress? Are you someone who helps relieve stress? Are you someone who thinks that in order for there to be a lot of energy, that there needs to be stress? Or can you show up in a way that's present and energetic without a lot of emotional wake? In Zen practice, there's an expression that says, "Don't be a smoky fire. Be a fire that burns clean." And I think this is really talking about your own emotional wake. So is there some kind of a trail as you walk from one, maybe from one building to another, and you have these discussions with people? What kind of emotional trail are you leaving? Are you aware of it? And what about leaving a positive emotional wake? What about people feeling good when you show up? What about people wanting to engage and feeling safe and energized in discussions? The second piece I want to say about this communication is, and it's similar, but it's the image I have is if you can see yourself in a discussion with someone, or you're watching some kind of communication, to notice the balloon that's there, and you often see these kind of cartoons where two people will be saying something, which is the content, and the balloon is the emotional piece, and it's also the identity piece. And I think the identity piece in particular is so important. So even asking someone, can you have this report? If you're a leader and you ask someone, can you have this report for me today? How you say that, the tone of your voice. I mean, we humans are so amazing at picking up on every little idiosyncratic tone, gesture. I mean, there's a really interesting book called A General Theory of Love, which is a book about how it is that we read each other's energy. And like I know standing up here, it really doesn't matter at all what I say. It's really about, no, I hope it matters what I say, but I'm aware of how important my energy is, like how I show up. And in some way, I think of these talks as like ideally I'm having a conversation we're all having a conversation. I mean, everything, even more than what I say, it's how I show up. And it's like you've probably heard that when you interview someone for a job, that it's so often within the first 3 to 5 seconds, you've maybe not come to a decision, but you've learned a lot about this person. In the book Blink, he talks a lot about speed dating. So speed dating is a way that has made use of how it is that within just a few seconds or a few minutes we have the way of deciding, are we in sync with this person who's in front of us. So I'm suggesting being aware of more than just the content of your conversations and communications. Be really aware of the emotional piece and the identity piece. So the identity piece is how you feel about yourself. Are you feeling some positive self-esteem? Are you feeling good? Or are you really feeling, kind of crappy? And it's not about always feeling good. It's not about never feeling crappy. It's about really being aware of what it is you are feeling, and what it is you are communicating to people in the room. The fifth piece is small changes for big results. Small changes for big results. And I recently I recently met with someone who works at Fidelity Mutual Fund Company, which is a company that has 40,000 employees. And I was surprised to hear in my conversation with this leader at Fidelity that he said it's not written anywhere, but that it's on the lips of all 40,000 people at almost all times in Fidelity. And it's this word, which maybe some of you have heard, it's called Kaizen. Kaizen. And it's not the Zen from Zen. This particular Zen means good, and Kai means changes. So it's changing things for the good. And it's making small changes constantly. And I've noticed for myself, like it's I think really astounding that what if you actually put this into practice? Like, it's easy to say, but I want to suggest that you actually think about what are some small changes that you could make in your work life today. Like today. What would be one or two small changes that you could make today? And how might that change your ability to accomplish more with greater ease if you had that as something that you were looking at on a daily basis? What small change can I make today? And that you were writing that down, that you were holding yourself accountable, and that maybe you were holding the people around you accountable. Like, what changes, what positive changes did we make today? And it can be really small, very, very incremental changes. But it's amazing how I notice I've just recently started putting that into practice, and I found it to be really, really useful. And it's not just a bunch of words. If you make it not just a bunch of words, if you make it, what small changes can I do today that would make a difference? The sixth practice right. This is an interesting one. This is called what I call integrative thinking. Integrative thinking. And again, this is one of those things that I think that we do all the time, but it's, I think, bringing it up into more consciousness. And I think it really adds power to it. So integrative thinking is holding two what look like contradictory ideas in your mind and not being caught by thinking that you have to decide one or the other. There was a study, I think this was in a recent Harvard Business Review. They talk about this study that was done about what makes business leaders exceptional. What is it that business leaders do that is exceptional? And what this person who did the study found was just this, that they were always holding these competing ideas and not being forced into deciding. And in fact, what often ended up happening as the longer they held and massaged those competing ideas, something emerged, some decision emerged that maybe had elements from both of these what look like competing ideas. And I think there's many, many ways to use this in your own life. I think of, there's a terrific Walt Whitman poem from The Leaves of Grass where he starts, I am a contradiction. I am a contradiction. So I think, I suggest that all of you write that poem for yourself. Look at the way that you are a contradiction. If I look at, I notice, like at work, I take a long time to make decisions. I'm very slow in making decisions, and I can be very decisive and quick when I need to be. At work, I aspire to be completely myself, and I'm aware that I'm always playing some role. It wouldn't be true to say that I'm completely myself, because I'm playing a role. We all are playing a role at work, and it wouldn't be true to say that I'm not completely myself. In maybe a more pragmatic way, when I started my publishing company, Brush Dance, many years ago, we started as a as a environmental products mail order catalog, and then began to morph into becoming a wholesale company as our customers told us that we just were not a mail order catalog, we were a wholesale company. And it really worked. We kind of continued to morph back and forth between trying to take the best in both. And I know, Google does that in so many ways, as there's what are the ways to use a search engine? What is a search engine? And it's, as you all know, it's much more than a search engine. There are many, many contradictions to how basic business models can be used and morphed and grown, and to be able to hold these contradictions in your thinking and to really bring them forward. So integrative thinking is what I have as the sixth of these practices. And the seventh is something that comes from a lot of the creativity and innovation literature. The seventh is the practice of asking dumb or penetrating questions. Asking dumb or penetrating questions. And this starts, I think, with asking yourself dumb and penetrating questions like what is it you're really doing, or what is it you're doing that's extra, or how are my leadership skills really? What leadership skills do I need to grow in myself, and how would I go about doing that? What is it I really want to accomplish? So we're talking about accomplishing more. What does that mean? What is it you really want to accomplish? Why do you want to accomplish more? More of what? For what sake? Accomplish more for what sake? What does it really mean to lead a happy, authentic life? What does it really mean to help other people? How is it we can practice things like compassion? So I think this is about having the courage to ask really, really dumb questions. I see now that most of you don't have your laptops in your lap. So I want to end by teaching you 3 yoga postures. So if you are willing to, just put down things. And how about even, is it okay to stand up? Will that work? So how about if everybody stands up for a second? So I want to teach you 3 yoga postures that I think are really important in business and are a good way to help you accomplish more by doing less. The first is a posture called courage. And what you do, it's really simple. Just stand up straight, take a breath. How about another breath? Bend your knees slightly. Put your hands on your groins. Hands on your groins. Head straight. Eyes looking ahead. And think courage. Let the word courage come into your body and mind. Courage. Okay. The second is the warrior pose. And this is about being a warrior. And there's many, many ways of doing the warrior pose. And this is one fairly simple one, is to take, so if you take, how about taking your right foot and point your right foot forward and turn your left foot kind of perpendicular to it. Bend your knees so you kind of get a bit, right, great. The whole room just bent there. That was terrific. And left hand kind of behind you and up, and right hand forward like that. And you're kind of almost lunging forward like a warrior. Back straight. So this is a warrior pose. Okay. This third yoga pose, this is not in any yoga book at all. You'll never see this in any yoga book. And this, I think, may be the most important yoga pose. And it goes like this. It's a pose that requires movement and voice. And it's you step forward, arms in the air, big smile on your face and go, I failed. So try that with me, right? I failed. One more time. I failed. Once again. I failed. You guys are great. You can sit down now. And the thing about failure is, if you want to, guess what? If you want to make any kind of change, if you want to do anything differently or better, you're going to fail at it. And why is it in our culture we get so tight, we get so tight and we cringe and our bodies kind of collapse anytime we make a mistake, like as though making a mistake isn't a good thing. What if, I kind of got this from improv classes that I've been taking, because I needed to have more places in my life where I could be terrified. But improv really allowed me to, over and over again, to feel terrified and to fail and to feel good about it. In improv, people don't want to see you look good and look like you have it together, and they don't want to see you screw up and feel bad about it. What they really want to see is for you to screw up and feel good about it. And imagine being able to take risks and try things. And again, this is about over and over again making lots and lots of little mistakes and learning from them. So like all of these practices, you will fail at all of these practices. You may set an intention that you're going to have a meditation practice every day, or you're going to change your routines and you revert into old routines. That I've noticed in some workshops I've done, once people get this I failed, you can really get into it. But it really completely changes the dynamic if you could see failure and see making mistakes as something to learn and grow by. And there's an expression in the world of Zen that the life of a Zen teacher is one continuous mistake. One continuous mistake. Again, it's that image that you may have heard about, like a good pilot, a good airplane pilot, is constantly, it looks like they're just going a straight course, but when you look really closely, they're constantly correcting, learning from that mistake and correcting. So please practice. I hope you'll practice all of these at home and at work. We have some time. If there's questions, comments, concerns, anything. Yes, please.
The last thing you were saying about mistakes reminded me of something that I overheard when I was starting graduate school. Just shortly after starting graduate school, I heard around the corner a couple of the professors talking about the new graduate students. And said, well, who do you like among the new graduate students? And he said, oh, well, I like this one particular guy. And he said, really? You think he's the smartest one? And he said, oh, no, he's not the smartest one. But every time he fails, he gets right back up and dusts himself off and keeps going. That's why he's the best.
That's great. That reminds me of there's a little story about the bee and the fly, right? If you put a bee in a jar and you put a fly in a jar, who will get out first? And why, right? The bee is a lot smarter, and therefore the bee will never find his way out of the jar. It will keep going into the light of the glass until it dies. The dumb fly will try everything possible and will eventually find its way out. I think it's the same kind of story. Thanks. Other questions, comments? Yes.
This is more. This isn't so much a content question; it's a meta question. You say you work with Google. In what capacity, and how do we get the chance to work with you?
You can talk to this woman right here. Marc, do you want to say something?
We have started a coaching program here. It's being piloted within the engineering organization right now. And Marc is one of the coaches that we have as part of that program. what I can do is I can send out, it'll be about 2 weeks, we're going to be announcing this, we're taking it out of pilot, and we'll be announcing it more broadly.
I'm sorry I hadn't thought to prime you to ask that question, so it was good that you... Yes?
You mentioned something about the Zen Center.
Yes.
And handled a huge budget of like millions of dollars. I was wondering, what has so much money got to do with this? Something where we even said that for relaxation, we said don't spend money and
the San Francisco Zen Center is, it's an organization that employs, about 150 people, and they have 3 different practice centers. So it's, it's a good question, right? Why do these Zen folks have assets and buildings and things? But the answer is that it allows people to come there and do retreats. It allows, there's free meditation instruction every Saturday morning at the Zen Center in the city, and there's all kinds of classes and programs, and so there's one of the things that I wrote a book. In fact, I do have some copies here of a book called ZBA, Zen of Business Administration, and the first chapter of the book is we are all Zen students and we're all business people, right? I would argue that there's no avoiding being a Zen student, in that being a Zen student means paying attention to things like life and death. We all are born, we all will have many transitions in our lives, and we will all die. So therefore, you are a Zen student. And Zen student is being aware and acknowledging these basic realities. And we're all business people, in that there's no avoiding money, and there's no avoiding work, and there's no avoiding assets, there's no avoiding taking care of transactions. So even if you are a doctor or a therapist or an engineer, you're a business person. No avoiding it. So I think it's good to be good at both. Try and be as skillful as you can at both.
Sorry, I missed the beginning of your talk, but another question, I think partly answered it. Is there any good books on Zen? Like I've read One, The Tao is Silent. I want something that's like fundamental, not just about business.
There's lots of good books on Zen. The first one I would probably recommend is called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind is kind of the classic book by Shunryu Suzuki. If you come up afterwards, I can give you details. I'd also recommend books by a Vietnamese Zen teacher named Thich Nhat Hanh. He wrote a book called The Miracle of Mindfulness, is a good starting Zen book. Yes?
Also, in analogy with what you were saying about the San Francisco Zen Center providing a sort of resource for the community, and that's why there's all the millions of dollars and everything. I don't know if anybody's interested, but in fact, the nearest Zen Center here in Mountain View is just a mile up Range Street. So it's right down the street.
Yeah, there's one in Mountain View, and then a little further up there's a center in Redwood City. It's called the Insight Meditation Center. There's sittings and talks there. Yes, please.
This is more of a content question. So I think I've been doing a fairly good job of getting routines that sort of bring me back to mindfulness when I sit to eat, when I get out. But those are the times when I'm explicitly not doing those things that I need to do during the day. I find that sort of once I leave that moment of, so I'm very mindfully getting dressed, and then I go out the door and all hell breaks loose because meetings I don't expect, whatever. Can you think of any tricks or any recommendations for bridging the gaps between these places where I'm in control enough of my life to be mindful, and then I sort of have to get from one of them to the next?
Well, it's really interesting, I think, to pay attention to the transitions. Those those transitions are really the most difficult and probably the most powerful. And the transition even of like getting up in the morning, like that's one of those transitions that most people pay no attention to, right? The transition of what is your state of mind like? What are you doing when you get up? Or those transitions from that morning, that kind of, most of us have some kind of a morning routine, and then there's some kind of transition into work. So, some people like to experiment. You might experiment with, like something I didn't talk about, that's a practice within this priming, is the practice of slogans. Is to have some kind of quote or reminder or something that you write down on a card and you have with you. So maybe if you know that when you arrive in your office, that's where you lose it. That you have something waiting on your desk there. That it might, whatever it is for you, it might just be breathe or appreciate your life or pay attention. Whatever it is for you. And there's actually some books that have a lot of different slogans in them. But it's, I think, best just to make them up for yourself. Which ones are most useful for you? Did that signal mean we were out of time? Thank you all very much.